us into that discussion, we have a presentation by Ms. Anataria Uwamaria. She is the Director Business Competitiveness at Trademark Africa. And like I said, this is a hybrid conference, so the next presentation is going to be online. So ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together and welcome Ms. Uwamaria. Can you hear us, Anataria?
Yes, I can. Unfortunately, I'm unable to switch on my video. But good afternoon. My name is Anataria Uwamaria. I'm the Director of Business Competitiveness within Trademark Africa, and I lead on our private sector portfolio. It's a pleasure being here with you all.
Hello, Anataria?
Yes, David.
Hi, how are you?
Hey.
Okay, you can't switch to video, so we'll, I'll just call everyone else.
Okay, now I can.
Oh, you're good, we see you.
Yes.
And the reason why we started with you is that I'm a little bit embarrassed that all the names that I'm going to call up now, unfortunately, are male. It's unprecedented. But nonetheless, we are where we are. So I'm going to call very quickly Dimitri Pozidai from UNCDF. We've got Spencer Sabiti from Stanbic Properties. We've got Alan, Free Seating. Richard Zulu. And there's Professor Kanyarusoke from Busitema. So if it's any consolation, Anataria, you'll be hovering above them, which is really, yeah.
That's fine with me, David.
Karibu. How's Nairobi?
Very hot.
Okay. There's, I think Alan's missing. Ah, he's there. Alan. As he walks up, please don't interpret my sitting on a stool as something to reflect the casual approach to this panel. It's a very serious collection of minds. But I think one of the things I need to tell you is that what we want to do is not have a distance between the delegates and the panel. I think there's going to be a merger of thoughts and opinions because we were tasked by the minister to come up with an action ledger which they'll shepherd into hopefully something that we can come and celebrate in a year or two. But let me, the construct of this panel is very deliberate and I'll get into it. But I think it's important that we pick up from the conversations of the morning. There was a deliberate balance between regulatory conversation, specific transactions, and obviously Antoinette hosted the two Richards on what was a very lively debate with a strong bias towards textiles and apparels, but some of the real estate conversation came up. If we are to reprise an analogy that I used in my opening remarks, if we think of green industrialization as a river, there's multiple tributaries that feed into it. And I think the trade and industrial aspect being sort of your main strand, there are very different components that feed into it. Part of it is the ability to develop the right space, the academic dimension in terms of R&D, and making sure that that production line of human resource fits the expectations of your off-takers. There is SME or pre-SME finance and the packaging of that component, as well as that thin line between the community and the development itself that is channeled through sub-national governments. How ready are they to accommodate this investment and the complicated intricacies that come with it. And then if you wrap that around, and that's native to the space itself, you have to figure out a way of getting the product outside of the zone. And that's where Anataria from Trademark Africa comes in. You need to be able to really deal with a myriad of complexities around different borders, rules, regulations, standards, to make sure that the product is got into market. So that's really the introduction of this panel. I would expect that at some point the audience engages in terms of bringing their perspective. When we saw Mozambique this morning, little did I know that there's people who go to industrial parks as tourists. There's some people from the tourism space here. So that really is something that I'd like to progress with. If that's okay with everyone, I'll set the rules for my panel. We'll have 3 minutes each. I think everyone has a microphone. We will have the lady last in this case. But we'll just start from Alan, PSFU. Your reflections on the conversations of this morning and how that fits within the context of pushing this pragmatic approach around industrial zones for the private sector. Your time starts now. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. Well, my reflection for the morning session starts by something we have been trying to speak about for over quite a period of time. The issue about development vis-a-vis industrialization and what must be done in that direction. Unfortunately, I always start by telling colleagues that industrialization is a war. It's an economic development which must be done deliberately. There is no organic growth of industry. It is always deliberate. So when I had this morning about things like cost of transport, cost of electricity, things like what do you need to set up an industry, it is indeed very deliberate. If you are going to do all these things, there must be a mixture of the public sector and the private sector working together towards that one major goal. And if you look at all the industrialized countries, there is nothing that really sprung out of the ground without any deliberate effort towards it. So that is one element. Then the other element which I am very conversant about, which was in this morning, was the issue about the ecosystem. And again, ecosystems around industrialization. Unfortunately, it is the one sector which has forward and backward linkages. So even if you just, there are two kinds of industries in the world. It's either agro-based or mineral beneficiation based. There is no other way you're going to. So in other words, you need the raw materials to do that. Is that time up? Okay. Yes, so you need to do the backward linkages, then comes in all these other things apart from production, the ecosystem around production, but not just that. Now you need to begin the marketing aspect. So how do you brand, how do you package, how do you sell, how do you after sales service? So it's the whole shebang. And therefore, you need a perfect ecosystem and deliberate force. Lastly, you can talk all you want. You can even talk for 100 years. You need to get your fingers dirty if you want to industrialize the country. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And I think just to go back to what happened before lunchtime, we had a delegate from Mauritius, Dev, who really broke down a few of the dynamics that went into them, a non-cotton producer getting into the top rank of manufacturers of textiles and apparels, I think globally, not just on the continent. One of the things maybe what was missing was the contribution of academia. I think, maybe biased, but there is some genesis of these conversations that start at universities. So Professor, I wonder if you can shed some light on how the dynamic of academia comes into the whole industrial conversation, sir. Thank you.
Hello? Oh, okay. Professor Kanti Kanyalsoka, my name's, and from Sitema University, and reflecting on this morning's contributions, we as in the academia basically see quite a number of things. First of all, we are in teaching, learning, research, and development. And the space which is being created, which will be created by the industrial parks, has a lot to do with us. For one, we supply the high caliber skills for that industry. So, in other words, the people that we train, okay, are going to be working in those industries, and therefore, or in those industrial parks at very high level. So, we need to cooperate. We need to cooperate with the industrial parks. That's point number one. Point number two is about research and development. If an industrial park sets up nearby, okay, then the proprietors or even the managers or even the operatives, quite often they'll have specific problems in their processes. Now, we would like a situation where we cooperate with those people to solve those specific problems or to do research that leads into that. But even if that was not the case, we in the academia are obliged to create new knowledge, to create new products, to create new innovations. When we do that, then we need an outlet for them. We need an outlet for these things for commercialization purposes. Therefore, we need to cooperate very, very closely with the industrial practitioners in, say, the parks to be able to absorb our products. I could go on. Further, when it comes to the nature of business in industry, they are very, very fast. That's the truth. Business is normally much, much faster, for example, than we are in the academia. So we would like, for instance, new changes. We would like to be informed of the new changes that may be taking place in the business world, so that we can take them on and teach our clients, our students, those new changes as fast as they come on board. Sometimes in other universities or in other countries, there is industry-university cooperation where the university calls on industrial practitioners to come and give occasional lectures to students in the university. Sometimes it also happens that the academics, the faculty staff itself, gets attached to those industries, so that they get the feel of what it is to run a business under high stakes conditions. So we would like eventually to see such a situation. I could go on, but for now, I think that's enough.
Thank you, Professor. We'll put a pin in that, because I think when you look at the construct of our economy, you have a strong bias towards sort of basic agriculture, primary agriculture. I always talk about a mill in Amuru. I have never been to Amuru. I don't know what a mill looks like, but that's my standard presentation. And I want to bring in the FAO guys who are in the room later, and IFAD. But a lot of the conversations for these small farmers or these small businesses, MSMEs, is that research is one thing, but we need funding, we need a leg up, so that if me and my neighbor and their neighbor consolidate, then we can supply the factory that someone is investing in. I want to give the floor to Richard for some insights on how that issue can be addressed, whether there's any programming in the country already that deals with the smaller person that's 4 tiers removed from that big factory. How do I, as a small person, latch onto it? Are there any interventions in space that address the funding deficit or its cost, or perhaps even those skills that are required in order to get the quality going. Your time starts now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So as introduced, my name is Richard Zulu. I'm the team lead at Outbox, which is an entrepreneurship support organization working with early stage small and growing businesses. One of the things we're doing is trying to unlock patient capital and build linkages to markets and infrastructure for small and growing businesses. So one of those interventions is with NSSF High Innovator. It's only in Uganda, within the East African region, where you're having a pension fund playing in the greenfield space. So we have a target of supporting 500 businesses. We are so far at 103, and we've learned some very, very interesting things with regards to industry. Actually, we've seen that the potential of one small and growing business in light manufacturing is an average of 9 direct jobs and 64 indirect jobs. For us, that is very powerful with regards to the potential. And I'm talking of businesses that are not making over $1 billion shillings. I'm talking of small businesses. If at this stage they can do that, then there's very high potential. So I want to speak to our experience and what we've seen. So industry is a very, very broad topic. And if you're to look at Uganda's GDP, its contribution is 20.6%, right? But very interesting is a small subsection of that called light manufacturing, which contributes 8% of the 20.6%. But in there, what you're seeing is that section, that segmentation is largely dominated by small and growing businesses. But they are largely, the barriers they face are largely attributed to their capacity to produce and largely to export, right? So we believe that if we are able to address the small and growing business problem, that bracket will move from 8% to something a bit higher. But Uganda has a target of 32% as per its industrialization agenda of GDP coming from industry, 32, right? So we are still way off our target, but I believe if we contribute and support small and growing businesses, there's an opportunity. Now, what we've seen with the small and growing businesses, largely light manufacturing, where we have a big amount of the portfolio, is that the things that inhibit them, I believe, are things that we can address. You have access to infrastructure alone, shared infrastructure. These are businesses that start off by leveraging shared infrastructure. And currently you'll find shared infrastructure at NARO, CURAD, or Uganda Industrial Research Institute. But imagine there are so many of them that time allocation is not enough for you to produce enough. The second is the access to the talent that they really need to produce what they need, and the other is the access to markets. We tend to overlook access to markets, but it's actually a very, very critical enabler. Just that linkage to a big off-taker can do a lot more for this small business. So what we're trying to do is we're coming up with a cohort solely focused on light manufacturing, where we bring in the infrastructure providers, we bring in the export market providers, and focus more on building those linkages as we move forward with our financing. And I think when you get the mic again, it would be nice to share some of the lessons you've learned when you're building backward and forward linkages.
I think you can get the mic right now, for 30 seconds, because we don't want to lose our train of thought. Do you mind responding very quickly to that?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate what my colleague from Outbox is talking about. The lessons learned is that the success of industrialization is that ability actually to do both backward and the forward. In other words, the sourcing of the raw material at a cheaper cost so that you're able to produce. Now, the other issue which is around here is the cost of production, which we are working on. And then lastly, that element of moving out of the production into the space of marketing and sales and after sales services. There lies a beauty that if you have to solve the issue of Uganda at the moment, which is basically unemployment, that is where you start from. So I'll give an example. At the private sector foundation, just like they're doing, we have this structure, a project called Enhancing the Lead Farm Structure. So that particular structure does anchoring around strong industries, both backwards, in other words, how do you link these huge industries like Mkutano and link it to farmers who are then going to supply Mkutano with the produce. And may I report, as we speak, we're at 50,000 farmers in that system. Now, what does Mkutano have to do is how do you link the production out of Mkutano and the area of oil, vegetable oil, and then they do the marketing so that the vegetable oil can then be sold not just in Uganda, but across East and Central Africa, and voila, your jobs will be created. Such a system is what we're doing.
That's really interesting. I think we have to pick up this conversation after. One of the things that I had Mr. Ayota, is the acting CEO now of NSSF, when he talks about the motivation that the fund has behind a high innovator, is that they've analyzed the data and they've realized that at the top tier of business, so your large corporations, many of whom you represent, there's really not much growth. Year-on-year growth is much smaller compared to the businesses, the regular 1NG businesses, and that's the motivation behind that funding. But there is space for commercial banks to play. Patricia, I expect to hear from you shortly. But Stanbic is a very interesting organization because there's a holding company that has bank, which we know about, and then there's a property operation that Spencer Sabiti leads. Spencer, we've had, if you drive between here and any direction, you'll see a mall, an apartment, another mall, an apartment block. In the morning we had that there's no purpose-built factory. Yet this real estate space seems to have a lot of promise. The Mozambican example said that there's some operations that can work with a couple of $1 million. So smaller, some of your clients, maybe even yourself, you can make these investments. How do we pivot the money people? How do we change those minds to make sure that when Alan and Biko and even Professor get together and they give you the opportunity, you can put the funding behind real estate, but that which speaks to industrialization, and perhaps give us an overview of your approach as a business to this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Once again, as introduced, I'm Sabit Spencer Oyes, and I'm the Chief Executive for Stanbic Properties, which is a subsidiary of Stanbic Uganda Holdings Limited. And our mandate, we deal in real estate, that is facilities management, property management, and advisory services. So I want to, Dave, to just give an overview of our real estate sector. We've experienced a number of challenges, one stretching from inflation. Those who are active in construction, you've seen that a bag of cement came from about 26 to about 36,000 in the same year. You've also seen a rise in steel and also steel products and cement. We've also got an issue of non-performing loans. Those who are in the banking sector, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. We've seen an increase of about 4% in the same year, and this has led to a number of properties being sold out to clients, of course, after failing to pay. For other banks have come up with some solutions that would make customers be able to pay in a short run. Also, on the real estate, in terms of what is trending, we've seen a number of individuals opening to borrow from circles to buy land or probably complete their houses, and therefore for anyone tracking this sector will get a number of difficulties because, as you know, SACCOs is normally from a person engagement which is not regulated so much like commercial banks. And of course, we've also seen Ministry of Lands doing a lot of digitalization. So it's one of the opportunities because this will reduce fraud. We've had a number of players in the real estate sector selling one piece of land to about 10 customers. We are seeing this reducing, and this is one of the opportunities that we should now pivot in as we go to these industrial sectors. To the question, Dave, that you asked, of course, once you open up these free zones, there is a lot of government interventions. You've seen whenever you open up what you call a free zone, the government is so keen to extend services, not only roads, but power and utilities, and these are very key for anyone just starting as an SME to develop or start manufacturing. This has also not helped the government, but where there are free zones or industries is also accompanied by the demand of essential necessities because of the pressure coming from the population. So there will be a lot of demand in the rental, and this will also kind of reduce what is all demanded in the urban centers. For example, in Kampala, we've seen a decrease of 1% in retail space. We've been just talking with one of my colleagues, and you note that some actually urban centers, malls, are not fully let, and thus this will help to push this as these industries are coming up. We believe, like in our sector, that the SMEs of today are the corporates of tomorrow. So as we push them in those free zones, Pakwach, Busema, Mukono, Rugazi, wherever across the country, and in these upcoming cities where there is a marginal kind of population growth, when we open these centers, of course, there is already a high population, people will be scared and they will multiply, and thus reduce a number of pressures that we have here in Kampala. And lastly, you also see that as we increase on the production, there's also an increase in industrialization. When you see warehouses, even in Kampala, and as you exit, you see so many being built as you exit Kampala. If you go this side of Bulenga or Chengela, Mukono, that's where you're seeing it, and that's where you're seeing them. And this is also a contributor that once these free zones are opened in those outskirts, will have an increase in production. As players, as you enter in this space, there is one aspect that you need to consider, that is ESG, on sustainability, on how this whole ecosystem would have to work. We need to conserve our environment, and as you see all these development banks, as they appraise you when you come for money, they want to see what is your sustainability program as a company, where is your focus along those lines. Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer. There are two words you brought up there, sustainability at the end, and before that, cities. And Dimitri, who, always good to see you. I call you Professor as a teacher now in Makerere University, but he's the head of office of UNCDF in Uganda and a very good friend of the Mkutano, just not only as an institution, but as a contributor. So when cities come up, Dimitri, and sustainability, we're getting off the reservation somewhat, because now we're dealing with a municipality, a district, a town, maybe even a city itself, that in itself is a custodian of a multitude of assets, the people, the resources that that industrial zone is going to draw from. Oftentimes, perhaps these cities are not prepared. They may have some capacity shortcomings. The funding may be an issue. I know UNCDF specializes in the subnational realm from a financing perspective. It'll be good, Dimitri, for us to get from you an understanding of how UNCDF approaches this entire story, particularly when you want to bring in some of Spencer's clients on one hand, but knowing that between Alan and Richard, there's also the small one angel like myself who need to get into that bag one. What's your approach as UNCDF? How would you advise?
Looking at industrial park development as an ecosystem and not the traditional brick and mortar. So Trademark Africa is a non-for-profit trade facilitation agency that's currently operating across different countries in Africa with us over the last 12 years. So for us, competing in global markets needs us to be competitive to the highest degree. So reducing cost and time commodities market is a priority for trade.
Anataria, sorry, the line, sorry, I think
We've done that over by eliminating barriers to trade. So things that are bottlenecks at points.
Anataria? Let's try switching off your video because the sound's a bit off. So I think you could do that and try again. I'll take some time off Spencer's next submission. Are you there? Okay, I'll wait for a thumbs up from the Zoom team. Is she back online? Maybe as we wait for the connection to stabilize, I think Professor, you made some interesting points about the role, often neglected, sometimes totally ignored, of tertiary institutions in this whole story. Now, I don't remember the exact number, but I think we're probably operating at about 0.5% of GDP going towards research and innovation. I don't know how much of that is going to the universities, and if so, how much of that is going to this particular segment. There's a lot of private sector players here, some on your panel. If you're to convince them and again, outside there's a lot of institutions that have endowments that come out of the private sector. What's your sales pitch to Richard and other guys in this space?
Okay, first of all, before I answer that one, let me say this, that right now, the higher education institutions, they are heavily involved in what we are calling transformative education. That is to say, we want to put out graduates, for instance, who have a complete mindset change, who have completely changed their mindset in terms of looking for jobs, in terms of solving problems and all that. Now, I note here in our discussions, there is quite a bit of emphasis on export, on exports. That's okay. I have no query with that. But the real issue is that there are very many problems within the country which need solution, which need local solutions. So, for instance, we at Busitema University, we are dealing with things like post-harvest losses, value addition of agricultural products. We have innovations there. Now, these innovations, and we are actually teaching our students entrepreneurship, whether they are engineering students, whether they are medical students, whether they are agricultural students, we are teaching them, we are taking them on entrepreneurship. So these innovations, number one, they address local problems. And they need, number two, they need funding. Some of the funds, of course, come from STI, the Science, Technology and Innovation Secretariat has done a lot to help us in that direction, but we also need private partners. We need private partners to fund these student projects which help solve local problems. And we are encouraging the students to go out there and take these projects and sell them. Even as I talk now, for instance, in the morning, one of my group students was presenting, okay? One of my student groups was presenting to the university about a project which they are taking on after finishing their fourth year this semester. So now, relating it to here, what is the problem? The problem is that, one, of course, there is a shortage of finance, but two, there is also shortage of space where these students can work from. If somebody built an industrial park, even a small one, if somebody built an industrial park which could act as incubation centers for these students, okay, who are just graduating, so that after they finish the university, they go into a space and take their products there and perhaps do some bit of manufacturing there until they are able to raise enough money and go out on their own and build their own industries. That will be of great help. That will be of greatest help.
Your neighbor to your left, Richard, is itching to contribute there.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I think you've validated my aspect of shared infrastructure for processing. But I just want to ask you, one of the things we've seen when we're supporting small and growing businesses, largely run by students and at that point of transitioning out of university, is that the intellectual property policies of universities are not structured to allow these students to go out and become independent. I think you've heard of our COVID story. That is a very huge gap that is not being addressed transparently with all key actors on the table. So what you see is the research belongs to the university and the transfer to industry is not very clear. So I don't know if, Professor, you've seen it differently from the ones you've supported?
We're talking about COVIDX.
We're talking about
Professor Guang's COVIDX.
COVIDX.
Which, from what I remember, they were given land in one of the industrial parks in Soroti or Tororo. So where does the IP lie? Between the professor in the faculty or the university itself?
Okay, let me say this. That first of all, that problem is being addressed. So I don't think it should hinder you. For most of the intellectual property, and traditionally it belonged to the university, but now we are being required to actually share it. Okay, that should not stop a funder. I mean, like these students who have just worked on something, we are letting them go. We are letting them go. We cannot hold the country at ransom because of intellectual property. If there is a solution to a problem, a burning problem, we cannot, we should not. We should not.
Yes, sir. There is one very important aspect you have spoken about, which is research. And as we saw this morning, we need to have a pool-based research, not the other way around. And we at the Private Sector Foundation, together with our members, have been forward requesting universities to come and do research on our behalf, not us on your behalf, because then it loses the meaning. Because if you want to get funding from an industry X, you better come to solve their problems, not them to solve your problems. In this way, you get the A, the funding, B, you do research which is actually appropriate, and C, you get experience of working in that particular industry as the student develops himself. So this program is basically right now housed at one of our member associations. The Uganda Manufacturers Association offers you that, to link their members, who are our members, to the kind of research you want to do. And we do think this is the best way that you are going to grow this research fund to such a level that that is sustainable. Because the basket of this economy is not that big. And therefore, we do think that some of these requests are better shot towards the private sector to say, what can we do to solve your issues? And this way, you get to develop.
Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've moved camps to the delegate section. And I think as you started speaking, there was something that was burning in me in terms of sort of the other complement of finance and perhaps technical assistance, which I know that you at UNCF does. So I've got Martin here, who's explained where he comes from, and I think he can possibly contribute one or two things to this conversation, particularly from the perspective of agricultural value chains and the funding that's associated with him. So I'll put him on the spot. I hope he doesn't let me down and says no. So here, Martin, you can introduce yourself and your comment.
Sure. Thank you very much, David. You have put me on the spot, yes. Right, okay, my name is Martin Margustini. I'm working for FAO Investment Center, but I'm based at UDB, Ugandan Development Bank. So that's your bank. That's the bank for Ugandans. So please say yes. Anyway, very interesting discussion we have. And I like especially one point also related to agriculture. We know that the agriculture sector is mainly informal. I think, Dimitri, you actually talked about the informal versus the formal sector. I think it's very important that, you know, not only in the agricultural sector, also in the manufacturing or industrial sector, you know, those companies who are in the formal sector, they have to compete with those in the informal sector. And I can tell you, I've been there myself. I'm not only work for FAO, I've also been in the private sector. It's not easy. Those in the informal sector, they are not registered, they are not paying the taxes, they do all kind of funny things. But those in the formal sector, they have to meet all the requirements. And URA, they are the first one knocking on the door. Can you please pay your taxes? They don't do that for those in the informal sector. And there's a reason why, and that's not in the agricultural sector, there's a reason why ShopRite, especially the South African companies, but also others, Nakumat, what were they called? The other one, was it Uzumi? What were they called? Uchumi? You know, I think one of the main reasons was actually they had to compete with the informal. All those small shops in the retail sector, in the informal sector, you know. Maybe some of them are registered. So just keep that in mind. And also the purchasing poverty, you know, in Uganda. Maybe I can try to play the devil's advocate here. Are we a little bit premature, you know, in terms of those industrial parks, economic free zones, compared to Kenya, for instance? Are we ready? Are we ready to have those 14? Is it 14 across the country? Or should we just have 1 or 2? So maybe think about that. Back to the agricultural sector. Yes, it's not only informal, We have many challenges in the informal, in the agricultural sector. We are dealing with, many smallholder farmers. They are not organized. They are fragmented. Those, especially in the agri-industry, it's very difficult to get, consistent supply of produce. It's very difficult to get the quality. So when you are an SME or, in one of those economic zones, try to get those consistent supply of, let's say, maize that does not meet the quality requirements. It's a nightmare. It's really a nightmare. So from a finance perspective, we have all those clients coming in, not only UDB, but the other commercial banks and so on. It's not easy to finance those guys, because what they actually need is BDS, business development services. They actually need some training. And here I mean, we need to handhold them, we need to, I always say babysit them and so on, but really take them through the steps in terms of meeting those requirements. That's how it is, that's the reality. Definitely they can be supported, but they need that kind of business training.
Martin,
so that's where we are. Yes.
Martin, I think the panel, there may be some burning questions because you've brought up the finance conversation and training, and that's what Zulu deals with. And I think Zulu, your first cohort, had a strong tilt towards the agribusiness sector. But before we come back to you, I understand Anataria is back online. So if she's online, she can perhaps finish her commentary, and then we'll come back to you, Spencer. I know you have something to add, and then the audience can contribute. Anataria?
Thanks, David. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I've had to switch off my video just because of the bandwidth on your end is a bit low. But so our key focus as Trademark is along two thematic areas: removing barriers to trade and building competitiveness of businesses. So on the barriers to trade, we've done quite a lot of work with governments in the region, including the government of Uganda, around the establishment of the single window, supporting UNBS around standards and certification, and the Ministry of Agriculture around SPS. All these things play, a big role when it comes to competitiveness of businesses and the ability for public sector players to offer efficient services is therefore quite important. So when it comes to the industrial parks, these costs of compliance, costs of processing either exports or imports are what are transferred into the final price of the commodity. And if that's too high, then it means we are not competitive in global markets. Then when you come to the private sector side, industrial parks bring a lot of opportunities for value addition and greater integration with the local economy. So as we look at the development of industrial parks, for us, we ask the question of what change can be, what's the transformation to the local economy, to how local businesses run and operate. So building the competencies of SMEs and supply chain optimization to make sure that they then are able to take advantage of supply chain opportunities within the park. So in Kenya, for example, with the development of an industrial park in Kilifi in the coast of Mombasa, we tried to implement what we call the connectivity initiative, where we work with the private sector and public sector to ensure that local SMEs and farmer groups are able to take advantage of opportunities within parks. So if it is agro-processing, for example, and you have a fruit processor, how do we make sure that that small farmer is able to tap into that supply chain? So things like aggregation therefore become important, and then transport and logistics. How do they move their commodities from the farm to the industrial park? And then meeting quality standards so that they're able to meet market entry requirements. So if a processor in a park requires a farmer to have, food safety standards that are up to par, then that's something that we need to be able to provide as support to SMEs and local farmers. Then the other area that we work along is around fostering public-private dialogue. So Antoinette and Sarah mentioned the work around, making the investors happy. So it's not just about bringing in investment, it's how long are they able to stay in this region and produce in a way that has economic impact for us all. So with that, the aftercare services, making sure we listen to investors and businesses on issues like MTBs when they try to move goods from, say, the port of Mombasa to a park in Uganda. A lot of times we hear people saying there are issues at the port of Mombasa with system downtime. Who do I speak to? So we've facilitated what we call the Port of Mombasa Charter that brings together private sector players and public sector around service delivery at the Port of Mombasa. So this is a platform that could be replicated anywhere at a border crossing or even at county level, whereby investors know very well, if I have an issue, this is how it will be addressed. As I wind up, I think for me, the last and one of the most important things is working with the government, ensuring that trade policies that are put in place speak to national priorities. So you have investors who are looking to move into East Africa in the cotton, textile, and garment sectors because of preferential agreements, say, for example, AGOA. So such things are important because they are then the beginning point or the opening door that enable investors to look at East Africa or the region as a whole as a potential home for their industries. So making sure that the preferential agreements we are signing are fully utilized becomes key. And then lastly, all trade facilitation tools and frameworks, things like the common external tariff, for example, need to be aligned very well with national priorities. And then looking at trade facilitation mechanisms like the authorized economic operator that helps fast track imports and exports, making it easier to access markets much faster and at lower costs. I'll stop there, David.
Thank you. That was most enlightening. And I was reminded, I think there's two things, but maybe we'll bring them up around the audience engagement or the delegate engagement. Spencer mentioned ESG, and when you unpack that, you talk about inclusion. When you talk about inclusion, you talk about access to finance. When you talk about access to finance, you talk about youth and women and how they seem to be disproportionately kept out of that conversation. Yet when it comes to the productive economy, especially in ag, the rank and file is majority populated by those. And I hope Patricia can shed some light on that from the Bankers Association perspective. There's an extension as well on the logistics conversation. But I'm not going to try and do the whole, you have 2 minutes to conclude conclusion here. I just want to ask, because I expect to harvest more opinions from my esteemed panel, is there any burning issues that you think that are front of mind right now that you want to bring up before I disband this panel? Anything that you may want to share? Alan?
Yes, thank you very much. As we get to that phase, one thing that, a few things that we as Ugandans must really start to think about. And these are things which really scratch our heads and give us sleepless nights at Private Sector Foundation. If you have a population growing at 3.2% per annum, you do the mathematics of 43 million, and at that pace, you are releasing in this job market 600,000 young people into the market every year. And if you look at the way the industries are growing and the sector, the GDP is growing, what are those things that we as Ugandans must put in place to grow? And we should actually reach a point where we stop talking about them and start doing something about it. One of the things that is making us have sleepless nights is this cost of financing. Right now, as we speak, the Private Sector Foundation is actually partnering with the MasterCard Foundation to develop a catalytic fund. That is a financing system to help Ugandans be able to borrow at sustainable rates. The truth of the matter is 20% cannot lead you to development, no matter how you do it and try it. It's such a high rate. So we are thinking around that, and we are already in the process of creating a catalytic fund of $1 billion to help those young people, to help those SMEs be able to approach and get that support. Secondly, what we are doing again in partnership with the foundation, how do you provide that business development service to these SMEs to grow? The hand-holding, the lifting, the heavy lifting, there has to be someone to do that. Really, you can't ask a blind person to do all these things. It's how you help these people move. If you're talking about the development of agriculture, how are you linking agriculture to industry? If you're talking about development of industry, how do you link industry to trade and all those things? And those are the things which are really giving us sleepless nights as a private sector foundation. And our job is to find a mechanism in which we speak to our partners in government and we together work out a mechanism. One of the things you've talked about is these industrial parks. How do we really make them work? It's not just about calling people to put up industries, but the policy, industrial policy. What are you really doing about it? It's not just about the cost of financing. It's 20%. Okay, we understand that. It is 5 US cents for only a few sections in the industry. But right now, the electricity costs about 8 to 10 or 16 US cents. How do you bring that down? The cost of logistics, you're very far from the cost. How do you solve these issues and make this economy move from the growth of 3.2 to 6.8 to 12.2? And there is when you begin dealing with this issue of unemployment in this country. So that's what keeps us
It's truly
sleepless nights.
an ecosystem situation.
Thank you.
Spencer?
Thank you. Just building on what Apollo has just been saying, of course, all our parameters around real estate will always tag around the population, but there is something that he has just mentioned, which is about the cost of funding. I think this is not something that we should take for granted. It has a number of stakeholders. We've had finance coming from the agriculture sector. I think right now it's the lowest, which is about 10%. And of course it is within selected banks. Though the parameters to access that money, I wouldn't say that it's just something that is straightforward. So it leaves the other items in the whole ecosystem not be completed, especially on infrastructure. And that's why I was saying that for the industrial parks, we are just lucky that the government has taken up a directive to make sure that they take on these infrastructure developments. That's the utilities, the roads within the parks. But if through maybe private sector foundation, you can also motivate that for those building in those parks, especially the warehouses, which will contribute. Even the Bible talks about it. I'm not going to talk about the formation of housing, but at least one of the best needs of life. You have to have shelter and clothing and food. So you've tackled agriculture. We've tackled about shelter, and that sheltering will have also their input. The university is producing engineers. And I like what David you've talked about. When you produce these engineers, they come when they are very low, or whatever they study, they cannot practice beyond getting that degree. So I like this conversation that from this kind of collaboration, that if someone is doing a university, a private sector foundation is organizing different centers where these people can be trained, and also be getting the right skills that will help them grow the economy. Thank you.
Hello? Yeah. Very good point on cost of financing. Business development services, he hinted on it. We've just completed draft standards. I'm on the Business Development Services Working Group in terms of how good business development services should be provided. From my experience, we have a lot of fake business development services that are causing our businesses that are trying to become formal have a lot of challenges 4 years down the road. But what I want to speak to is the journey to compliance. If we are to help these informal businesses become formal, one of the things that we need to crack is the journey to compliance. And unfortunately, the policies are not developed in such a way that they help an informal business ease into compliance. The moment you're on someone's radar, the next email is an assessment. You don't even know where it has come from. So even as we're trying to help these businesses become formal, I've honestly looked at these businesses. It can't just happen overnight. The incentives have to be right to ease into compliance, and the education has to be right. So we have to educate our regulatory authorities also, and also work with some of our members in the executive or even in parliament to have more favorable policies that take into consideration the journey to compliance. So for me, I believe that as we slowly move these businesses up the pyramid, I'm telling you, one of the most things that they're scared about beyond the cost of financing is the journey to compliance.
Thank you, Richard. I want to maybe open up the conversation to this section of the whole. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Patricia, but you and I have had some discussions that are very pertinent to this conversation. And one of the things about finance is that if you look at the makeup of this panel in itself, with Professor as well, is that there's a segue of finance that should pass from perhaps Richard's hands into Alan's, into Spencer's, into the development partners. As the business grows, the form of finance, the structure, tenure tends to change. And Anataria herself, and also the form of the technical assistance changes. So in that vein, I think we're not disbanding this WhatsApp group. We're going to keep it live and really bring on board other learning so that when we go to the minister through our government representative here, we can really share those insights and make sure that we keep them, keep the pressure on. So I'm going to walk the plank and go to Patricia, who's going to kick off the open debate.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, fellow delegates. My name is Patricia Amito. I work with the Uganda Bankers Association. And thank you, David, for putting this together, the Mkutano. It's my first time to attend, but the discussion is very rich. I hope to get additional invites for the next ones. Up to the conversations we're having about industrial parks, economic zones, I think it's a very good conversation to have. And if you asked me, what role do you see the Bankers Association doing or the banking sector doing? I'll start by saying, as a banking sector, we play the role, an intermediary role, largely, And the intermediary comes that we play is between depositors. These are those who lend money to the financial institutions, and the borrowers, the ones to whom we lend the money to. So pretty much the money that the financial institutions are lending to the public to facilitate trade, investments, are ideally monies that have been collected, accumulated within the institutions by way of savings, funds that have been deposited within the institutions, and also the alternative financing options that are available. There are numerous options that are available to support big investments, and we structure it in three ways. There's the short-term financing that is required for short-term investments. If you want to put up a personal house, for example, you want to buy a car, something like that. Then there are big-term or long-term investments, which the sector also supports. And industrialization, in my view, is that big-term investments. What's critical there is for us to actually, and it comes from the government level. The minister was here this morning and said the plan is to have 22 industrial parks set up over the next, I think, 5 years. I think it's justice, it will be of good justice for the stakeholders, especially in the private sector, to understand from the government side what's the plan in terms of financing these industrial parks. So that there's a plan that we can then fit in. What are the sources of income? What are the sources of financing that we are looking at? Is it domestic? Is it foreign? If it's foreign, if it's domestic, do we need to get an additional co-financing support that comes in by way of blended financing? But most importantly, also the other stakeholders will be very critical for the industrialization agenda is how inclusive is this? Are we only looking at industrialization and focusing on a particular category of sectors, or are we having an element within the industrialization that says out of the so many projects that we are going to put within this industrial park, 30% of them will be for women? Or are we saying we don't want to break that up, we'll only focus on them? And so that has to be very clear, so that as a country we also know that beyond just within our bigger picture, we also have a very deliberate effort to ensure that the woman, the youth are actually included in the direction that we want to take as a country. Speaking about sustainability as an industry, and that comes to the plan that we have effective 2023, working very closely with the central bank. There's been conversation around ESG, sustainability, greening, and towards the end of last year, early part of this year, which is last month, January, we sat in a meeting with the central bank, and it was decided that we promote an industry-led sustainability agenda as the financial sector, as the banking sector. What does this mean for us? We are deliberately going to be supporting financial institutions through developing principles that then will inform the standards that they will undertake as they embark on the journey of ESG, development of products that support green initiatives within the economy. They are going to be supporting SMEs that are involved in green financing or green businesses. And industrialization, for example, what are some of the financing options we have for, if, for example, an industry wants to have an improvement by way of their systems or processes, making them more green? Those are some of the products that we are going to be embarking on over time during the course of this year. And we've given ourselves about 2 years. And we'll keep informing the public of what's going on as a sector, so that we are seen to be aligning ourselves to, one, the global objective, but also, most importantly, the national agenda in terms of supporting manufacturing, exports, and industrialization as it's. I'll end there, David, for now.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the various presentations. My name is Stephen Keijuka, My day job is a central banker working in the financial markets department. However, I've been invited by Mr. Bikado Fungi on my own personal representation. I don't represent the bank today. So my comment really gears towards something Dimitri was mentioning about deepening and developing the financial markets. That caught my interest with great gaze, because obviously that's the area that I'm involved in. You talked about the municipal bonds that you're looking at perhaps going into the future. You talked about various green bond initiatives in Kenya, and indeed there is even a gender bond in Tanzania, which is geared towards enabling female entrepreneurs to get up and started. However, I do know that there are initiatives in the central bank, together with the Ministry of Finance, to look at infrastructure bonds, as well as perhaps diaspora bonds, as also an additional tool to raising financing and gearing it towards economic zones or any such initiatives as that. So that was my main addition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Sempambo. I work with Private Sector Foundation. I just have two comments. Actually, one comment and a question. The first comment I have relates with the good discussion we are having around industrialization. And we're having this at a time when we signed our final investment decision on oil just last year. And what that means is that we expect our exchange rate to strengthen. And I think it is already strengthening. If you look at the statistics now, that means, and actually there is a paper by EPRC that shows that our inputs are going to become 15 to 25% cheaper. Where does that leave our export promotion strategy and policy? It points to one thing: we need to stop talking about competitiveness and do it. We are now discussing credit. We are not discussing export-related financing. And that's a core area. I think for me that policy should work like medicine. Because when you get sick and you have a headache and you go to a hospital, they don't inject the head, right? They inject somewhere else. And the body responds. Now that is one of the fundamental challenges we have in the industrialization sector. There is no policy coherence. You promote industrialization, but on the other side, you're raising taxes, excise duty on innovation. So when will you match? We are discussing attracting new investors and setting up new industrial parks, but the investors in the industrial parks are not growing. These are the things that limit them to grow. I think we need to be more deliberate there. Now, my question goes to Anatalia. She mentioned a lot and the great work that Trademark East Africa is doing in facilitating trade. But one of the issues raised by the players in the industrial park that is limiting trade relates more with supply capacities. I want to appreciate if Trademark is interested in moving into that direction. Just last week, there is an exporter of coffee who lost a deal in China because getting the export procedures are so manual, and you have to call somebody who says that they have gone for a burial, but if you provide some money, they are available. So these are the things we are talking about. We need to clean that mess, and it has to be holistic. Thank you.
Anataria, are you still on?
So on that last point, yes, Trademark is working around, as I mentioned, supply chain optimization, where we are looking from a market orientation on how we strengthen both backward and forward linkages. So as the gentleman mentioned, one of the things is ensuring that connectivity actually works. Things like aggregation, and not just from an infrastructure perspective, but also just how the basics are done. How do you not lose quality of goods by aggregating from different farmers? So we are working especially to leverage private sector intervention, so working with anchor firms that are able to invest in their supply chain. So work around capacity building and awareness raising for farmer groups or cooperatives, work around certification to meet market requirements, and then addressing bottlenecks that relate to transport and logistics to and from the market. And then the traditional trade facilitation work that Trademark does, of working around systems and processes to make them less cumbersome. So automation for us has been transformational. The single windows, for example, have enabled processing of goods, without having to go through multiple government offices. And there is some work that Trademark has done in Uganda, and we are looking at opportunities as to how we will work with the Revenue Authority and the Bureau of Standards and the Ministry of Agriculture to improve efficiency of processing. So issues like what the gentleman has mentioned need to be a thing of the past if we are going to compete globally. And then lastly, on the issue of trade finance, I think the gentleman just mentioned it. Apologies, I don't know the name, but the last two speakers and the lady spoke around fit for purpose trade finance. You have a lot of requirements coming up, like ESG, for example, and the focus is always on, producers and the private sector. But there is need to strengthen the capacity and awareness of service providers like financial institutions, so that they're developing products that, provide incentives to the private sector, for example, towards moving towards more green technologies that reduce risk of them as lenders. But if we only look at the spectrum of the customers, then we'll always have the challenge where financial institutions don't understand the business at hand, and therefore are not able to develop products that are fit for purpose or affordable enough to serve the private sector.
Thank you. Kathy, how are we doing for time? Okay, there's a question there. Should we wrap up in the next 5-10? Antoinette.
Thank you. So just a reflection, what I'm seeing here, what I'm hearing as well is everyone here has the same vision. I think there's a very strong shared purpose, shared vision. I haven't heard anyone who has turned around and said, this is a bad idea. But what I do see is a lot of very different and diverse institutions. So my question or my proposal, I suppose, I don't know how we take it, but is how do we move this conversation forward from here? Because as the gentleman from the private sector said, the time is now. We can't wait and act and wait and wait. We have a huge youth dividend that needs jobs. We have builders ready to go. We have authorities that are keen to advance. So where do we take this conversation next? How can we make it practical? I know us as an organization are very keen to continue this conversation, and it stems exactly from what the gentleman says is the export promotion strategy, the marketing strategy, the investment attraction strategy, the development strategy, all has to fit together, plus the financing. And it's a lot of work. To me, if we end up with 5 factories by 2024, would have done a great job. I hope we do better, but I think that's my challenge to yourselves, because you're here in this ecosystem. We are not the primary actors, we're just visitors. So how do you guide us to help you? And where do we go from here?
Thanks, Antoinette. And I think that echoes what the minister said. I think his last sentence was, we need to go to him and give him a report and an action letter. I believe the government representative here will emphasize that. But I just want to put Dimitri on the spot somewhat, because you've been in conversations, you've been in fora, countless of engagements. How best can we package the highlights, the critical sort of action points, and push them through the relatively choppy waters of public sector bureaucracy, but also knowing that there's expectations of the private sector as has been performed. But just maybe picking up on what Antoinette said.
Yeah, this is a very relevant question, and as I have mentioned, this is not the first Mkutano that we are having together. And we have that experience of translating the discussions in these fora into specific policy actions. You know, these events are different from other talk shops, not only because we have representatives of the government and of other institutions and agencies who deliver practical interventions in the areas that we have been discussing, and this therefore contributes to the creation of a momentum of forming a certain common vision about how we should approach those problems. But also, through the mechanism of Mkutano, we have an opportunity to more formally influence the actions and policies of the government. 2 or 3 years ago, we had a Mkutano event that was focusing on local government finance, and the outcome of this was a memo endorsed by the Minister of Local Government, which led to development of a cabinet paper on revising the financing conditions for local governments. We had other events where high-level government colleagues participated and therefore could hear from various participants what are the issues are and how those issues can be approached and can be solved. And those became part of the government strategies. What I mentioned with respect to our work on deepening of financial and capital markets is also one of the outcomes of these discussions. It has clearly showed that the capital market under-delivers when it comes to financing local development. It has also showed, but those discussions have clearly showed that the efficiency of public investment management and public expenditure management in more general terms is inadequate. And we need to do something like the public investment financing policy, which I mentioned in my presentation. So there are some very tangible ways of how these discussions can be translated into specific and concrete policy actions.
I think it's quite a defined path that we can follow, and I'll leave it to Ambassador General to give us specific roles. 1 minute and then we wrap up, Richard.
Yeah, I think 1 minute to the previous speaker. I didn't get her name.
Antoinette.
Antoinette.
Yeah.
Guys, these things are already happening, and I think what has been shared here is related to what everyone is doing around these different challenges, right? The problem is that when many of us as Ugandans are called upon to participate in these initiatives, we don't show up. I can tell you we've been building the BDS standards, but you're practically pulling BDS service providers to come and be part of the process. We're building a startup act to support small businesses together with PSFU, but you're practically pulling people in to actively contribute. We are very good at problems. You're asked to contribute, you just come and bring more problems. But we know the problem. We're asking you, what should we do, right? We're building the business process and outsourcing policy together with the Ministry of ICT and National Government, National Guidance, right? And you're calling BPO providers in the room. But when you ask them what should we do, people don't have solutions. And I think my response to Antoinette and everyone in the room, that what do we need from you? How can we help? Participate. Show up, participate. Because these platforms are already happening, but your voices are not being heard as loud as they should.
Thank you. Call to arms. We are ready. We're locked and loaded. We will progress. Please join me in thanking my esteemed panel that has been very enlightening. And Ataria in Nairobi, thank you so much. We'll see you in Kampala soon.